Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our backyard. Golly, it's been a couple of weeks since I've created a video, and it is starting to feel a little bit like fall. In fact, today is the first day that we have woken up to where it is in the high 60s. Granted, we're still supposed to get to be 88, 89, 90 degrees today, but this feels so nice. My name is Crystal, and I garden south of Houston along the Texas Gulf Coast, and we are hot and humid. We have heavy clay soil, and we have a very long growing season. So today's video, I thought I'd go around and I would just kind of talk about the garden now that things are changing. And even though maybe our heat hasn't changed, what does change is the sun, the number of hours that we see it, and then the angle of the sun. And so it's not directly overhead per se. It is, I think today's October 11th. And so our plants have started to feel the effects. So a couple of things I want to talk about as I'm looking through the garden is if you follow my channel, you know that I am a pollinator gardener, and I like to garden specifically for butterflies, hummingbirds, birds, and of course native bees. So what actually flowers in the garden at this time? Well, firebush for us is such a wonderful shrubby plant. It flowers, it grows, this growth that you see here of the firebush is 1 year. So we froze this past January, and we froze very hard. It got down into the teens, and it even snowed a few inches, which is so unusual for here. So our firebush will die back to the ground level, and it doesn't come up immediately in the spring. But this growth that you see here is since the spring, and it is a wonderful, reliable pollinator nectar producer. Getting a little bit closer here, it isn't just hummingbirds that like these flowers or butterflies. Bees, the native bees, absolutely love firebush. This happens to be a smaller leafed firebush, and it has smaller blooms and then smaller berries, and the berries are eaten by the birds. You've heard me talk about this plant. I just can't say enough about firebush in your gardens. If you live in a hot and humid environment, especially in the South, firebush is just such a reliable nectar producer for you. There are different kinds that you can buy. This one is, I bought this at, I think, Lowe's, and it is a smaller leaf, Hamelia patens, and it has smaller blooms and then, of course, smaller berries. The one next to it I bought at a nursery, and it has larger leaves, and it has less blooms, but the blooms are larger, and then the berries are larger. These aren't completely ripe yet, but this is such a hit. I have both types. And then way in the back there, I have Mexican flame vine. Let's see if I can zoom in. I see blooms here. Butterflies love that Mexican flame vine. So as you will see, even honeybees. I don't know if you can see this honeybee in here. He's all in the flowers there of firebush. I also have a firebush that has more red, a red tint to it, red on the flowers, red on the berries. Look at these. These berries are starting to become ripe. I love that. It's just a really good all around bush, especially if you want to invite wildlife into your garden, like birds, like hummingbirds, bees, butterflies. Right next to it, I have a very large purple porterweed. And porterweed has just been beautifully flowering. Oh, I have a native bee here they will just sleep here overnight and wait until it warms up the next day. So this bee is on the porterweed here. This porterweed has really gotten very large. I love these specimens. It's a huge hit. Porterweed is a huge hit with pollinators. And now that it's cooled down a little bit, my porterweed is blooming beautifully. It's taller than my 6.5-foot fence. You know, the lantana has just been going beautifully all summer long, but it's really had a really nice flush here. And the butterflies that are coming through, from the monarchs that are migrating to swallowtails that are here, they really, fritillaries, they just love lantana. This is lantana camera, and lantana is a real tough thing. You'll hear a lot of gardeners say, oh, you don't want lantana, it's very invasive. And that can be true. Lantana camera is not native. But here's the caveat. You can buy sterile varieties that will not produce seed. And so they are just in your garden and they will flower and flower and flower. And that's what this one is. It is a sterile lantana, and it's called a mounding lantana because most lantana is not mounding, it sprawls. And I love this lantana. It is from the Bloomify series. This one happens to be red, and it starts out a little bit lighter in color, and then it turns to this darker red color. When it's lighter in color, that's when the pollinators like to land on it and get at the nectar. But this lantana has been such a good performer for me. Not all lantana is equal, so let me preface that. It is not equal, and so you need to really do your due diligence when you're looking at getting lantana. But boy, I tell you, it is such a delight in the garden for pollinators. I kind of like this rose color. I have red and rose, and I've always liked this particular color of the flower. Isn't that pretty? But boy, it has just been a wonderful plant to have in the garden. And I can see back here I'm going to have a lot of nice blooms coming on. Love lantana. For us, you know, down here in the heat and humidity, you really want to be able to plant plants that will stand out and do well in your gardens. Pentas are still going strong. And I have to share with you, I did cut back not all of them, but a good portion of my Stokesia, or the Stokes aster. And look at that. Got a nice little bloom here that's going to open here pretty soon. I should have cut back my plants earlier, and I might have gotten a second flush. but they kind of kept producing little bit by little bit, and I had a really hard time cutting those back. And so next year, a reminder to myself, make sure that I trim off the blooms so I can get another good flush. So in my center garden bed here, I shared with you that I planted late in the late summer some Mexican sunflowers. So let me go back here. Have them next to my cannas in throughout here, but I planted them in grow bags because I don't like the look of these guys when their leaves start to die. And so it was a real difficult thing to not have them this year. And then I decided, oh, I don't want to not have them because they flower so well, and the butterflies absolutely love these things. And so I decided to plant them in large grow bags, and I'm really happy. So this has been an experiment for me. Looks like that's going to be developing a flower here. And so I don't expect to freeze for a while yet. And so at least a good couple of months. And so these very well could be flowering, which is a good experiment because I don't see these. These are behind. Let me show you. Come back this way. These are behind my trellises. And this trellis is my cardinal climber. You can see it's starting to decline. Mid-October is about when it does this. I will have 500 plus flowers, blooms on it daily. I still have blooms. So I'm very happy for that. The hummingbirds are happy. The nice thing is I don't see these plants back here. So this works out well for me. I'll have, at least I think. So this was an experiment. We'll see how that goes. Now I'm going to wander over to the shade garden. So some of my caladiums are still doing very well. You can see in through here in my shade garden. And then others aren't doing so well. And so I think it depends on how much water they have gotten. But I wanted to draw your attention over here. This happens to be a native pigeonberry. And I've been kind of surprised with the plant. It loves this new little area that we created for it. And this is one of those plants that flowers and blooms at the same time. So you'll see blooms and berries at the same time. Birds love to eat these berries, and so I usually don't have these berries on this plant very long. They come in and snap this up. It is a shade garden plant native to Texas, and I've been really pleased with this pigeonberry. So we'll see how this overwinters and what it does for us next spring. The fall is when the Salvia madrensis does really well, and my hummingbirds have been all over this. Isn't that pretty? Salvia, it's kind of hard to find yellow salvias, and this is one, and it is, especially down here, it's better if you can give it morning sun, afternoon shade. That's what this one has. And it will reward you for these beautiful blooms all over. I guess it's a little hard to see because they are yellow, but it's not hard for the hummingbirds and the pollinators to find these flowers. And these bloom spikes are huge. They just get so big and so long. And they typically will bloom for me all the way through until our frost when we've frozen. So this has been a really good salvia to have in the garden this time of year. I was somewhat disappointed with my coleus that I planted in my shade garden this year because I did not cut it to allow for branching early on, and a lot of it fell over for me. But boy, I tell you, I've been having a lot of fun with these new coleus that came up from seed from last year. And some of these have just been beautiful, way more beautiful than the plants I had last year. And it's been fun because they're all so different. And so I've really enjoyed having these surprises, and they've all come up from seed. Isn't that crazy? I love it. So I've just let them go, and I could see when they started to come up, it's like, well, that's a really unique color. And so I've just let them continue to grow, and it's been, this whole section in here has been a lot of fun with these surprise coleus from seed. And right next to it is my host plant for the beautiful pipevine swallowtail butterflies, and it's coming back nicely. It gets eaten to the ground multiple times during the season. That's what it's for, and it just is beautiful. It's a beautiful ground cover, and so I'm so happy to see it come back. I have seen the butterflies in the yard. I have seen them lay some eggs, so I haven't really come through yet and really looked. I see there's some munching on leaves, but I haven't really come and looked at to see if there's any active caterpillars yet. Real happy to see this ground cover come back so beautifully. This is the second flush of blooms that I'm getting on the yellow shrimp plant. This has been so fun. I planted this plant at the end of August, beginning of September, and it had a beautiful flush of yellow blooms at that point, and it's starting to go through a second flush. So this has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this plant. I've never had this plant yet in the garden, and it's been a really fun surprise. Another thing that I want to share with you is this dwarf red porterweed. And I had purchased one plant, and these dwarfs it was really small. You can go back and look at what I planted in the spring. And it didn't take very long, and it wasn't flowering. So I had a lot of tiny little plants that I could tell were coming up, and I did not pull them up, except right in through here. I pulled these up. But look at this. I am just stunned with how this dwarf red porterweed reseeded. It didn't do this last year because I had bought a red porterweed. Everything died in the freeze, and I purchased a new one this spring and planted it. Tiny little plant here. And I have gotten so many volunteers. I even have a volunteer over here. Let me show you that. I have to laugh because I just noticed this fairly recently among my containers of salvia and hibiscus, tropical hibiscus. And look at this. This is crazy to me. So of course, it's a huge hit with the pollinators, so I'm not pulling it out, but it is in the container with my pink tropical hibiscus. To me, that's just crazy. They're super easy to pull up, so if you don't want them seeding or reseeding in your garden, but look at that. This is now taking over this whole end. That's a bat face kufia, but look at that. You know, I really like it at this time of year because a lot of things get to look tired and worn out. And this particular plant, the porterweed, is just a really good plant to have in your garden for your pollinators. So I did want to share that with you because Whew, I am just shocked with how this reseeded itself. I'm sure it was from last year's plant because this year's plant hadn't even flowered and I was already getting the growth to come up, tiny, tiny little plants. The Flamacanthus is a native plant. This has been flowering pretty well, but you can tell now, especially this time of year, my passion vine is growing all over it and it is going nuts. I've got the native up there and a hybrid here. Oh, I just love the growth. Plus, it is the host plant to the Gulf fritillary butterfly. So, you know, if you really want to invite butterflies into your garden, you want to make sure that you have the host plants, and then you will have the butterflies in abundance. What do you have in your garden that you are particularly enjoying right now? What is flowering? What is producing fruit? Share with us in the comments. You know, we have such a long growing season that it's nice to know what does really well down here and what you get a bang for your buck on. And boy, I tell you, there are many plants that you can be successful with in your Gulf Coast gardens. Well, thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful day. And I hope to see you again soon.